Okay, so this is Intro to Shakespeare, and we're just going to run through the syllabus very briefly, and then I'm going to, in the second two parts, I'm going to give an intro to Shakespeare in general, looking at his background, sort of general survey, and then I'm going to try and get into Measure for Measure, which I mentioned would be the first, not Measure for Measure, Midsummer Night's Dream as the first play. And I'll talk about what plays I've chosen and why, but I'll do that right now. So this is the syllabus, the reading plan that we have before us for the next semester. And I think I can skip over this. Learning outcomes, you can look at this yourself. The book I am recommending is The Ardent Shakespeare, but that was just because it was inexpensive for a full volume. I have the Riverside Shakespeare, but this is a tree killer heavy, like you can kill somebody by throwing this at them. And it's beautiful, however. There are really beautiful images in it, but it's really expensive. I mean, I've had it for quite a while. So I'm not going to replace it, and I like it. But Riverside's a good edition. There are many other. The Ardent Shakespeare editions are good. They're just in single volumes and so forth. I think it's nice to have the collection of plays, but then you have to lug it around. So anyway, the syllabus, what we're going to do. So it's because it's on a weekly basis rather than a bi-weekly basis, it's going to be a little more challenging than in years past for us. And I'm still teasing with the idea of doing what I've always done with it, which is to require some sort of performance on your part. To put on not a whole play, but a scene or a part of a scene. Because I'm teaching it as literature, but it really is a dramatic work. And one of the things that really helps to think about when you're reading it, and the Romantics read it as literature. They didn't really read it dramatically, but it's meant to be performed dramatically. And I think one benefits, even as a reader, if you think, how am I going to perform this? Like, how do I get in character? What is this person's character? And think about that. And maybe I can encourage you then, when you're reading the play even, think about this character. I mean, they're just lines, words on the page, but there is supposed to be a character behind it. What's that character like? Just think about that, and you have to visualize it, and you also have to imagine the relations between the characters. And that's easiest when you actually go to perform the play. So in the past, I have actually assigned little groups to do that. One person will be the director, will choose the scenes, and will choreograph it, as it were. It's not a drama class. You wouldn't be judged in accordance with your ability to act, which you'll be relieved at, most of you. It's more, I'm interested in what were you thinking when you did this? What's the thought process? Because I want to get you into that thought process of, this is a performance, these are characters, there are interactions, and how are you going to represent that in the play? The way you stand, the way you dress, the way you speak, the way you deliver lines, the way you interact with other characters, the audience, etc. All of those are part of the interpretation. So I'm still thinking about that and how it would fit with a 3-hour class. In the past, it was easier with a 1 hour. 2 1-hour classes, you just devote a class or a portion at the beginning. We still might work it. And if you're keen on it, then that might swing it for me. But I have done that in the past. And if we did that, we would just intersperse it at various points throughout the semester. I don't know, we probably have about 3 groups that would do it at intervals, not for the month of January for sure, but maybe into February and into March. But the plays that I have chosen are one comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Measure for Measure, which is a problem play. It's tragicomic. It has elements of tragedy, it has elements of comedy. They don't quite know where to put it. And then one romance, and the romance is The Tempest. And these reflect different stages and Shakespeare's development as a dramatist. I'll say more about this afterwards. I'll write something up on the whiteboard, but I don't want to interrupt myself right now. But generally speaking, he wrote his comedies at the outset of his career as a dramatist. So 1590 to 1604, roughly, is when he writes his comedies. Then and his histories, for that matter. So, and I'm not doing history plays. I, in the past, offered a whole course on Shakespeare's history plays and did a cycle. I'd be keen to do that again. I think it's very interesting. So to take 4 plays, like Henry IV, Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, and Henry V as a cycle, because they develop and the characters develop through the course of the plays, and that's interesting, and it engages with the Shakespeare's view of history and the Elizabethan view of history, and there's a lot to be gleaned from that. But this is just an intro to Shakespeare, and I thought I would avoid the history genre here. So I am going to do a comedy, however. So that's in the early stages of his career. After that, he moved into tragedies, which he's most famous for, and we'll do 3 of them at the end here: Macbeth, King Lear, and Hamlet. And you often do those in high school. Romeo and Juliet might be another one. So would Othello. So I mean, his best known plays, his weightiest plays, are tragedies, and those follow that comic period. And people speculate on why that might be, that he moves into more into the tragedy, and it might be the loss of his son. Hamlet, entirely possible. Towards the end of his career, he writes works like The Tempest and The Winter's Tale, which are categorized as romances, which are dealing with really a utopian, imaginative framework. Right at the end of his career as a dramatist, he writes these plays. And so we can speculate a little bit on that. And it is a general tendency. So he begins with the comedies and the histories, and then he moves to the tragedies, and right at the tail end into the romance genre of drama. But it's just speculative, really. But it is an observation. You can see the general tendency there in terms of when they're written. And I'll say something more about that when we actually get to the introduction to the plays. But this is the general thrust of it. So we'll do one comedy, one problem play, so it lies between the tragedy and the comedy. I've thrown The Tempest in here because I didn't want to throw it right at the tail end. I'll do all the tragedies together, so I guess I could throw The Tempest right at the end of the whole thing, just to reflect the timeline that I've suggested. Maybe I ought to do that. I don't know. Well, we'll see. I'll give it a little bit more thought. The Tempest is a late inclusion. I used to do 4 tragedies. Othello dropped out this time for no reason other than I wanted to put a romance in. And of the 4 great tragedies, I thought that Othello was the most dispensable. Really difficult call, actually. Anyway, but the means of assessment will be, it says class participation, but note here that could be a performance. As I say, you're not judged in accordance with your ability to act. It's more the thought process. You're going to demonstrate, because after you've performed it, then the class asks you questions. I saw that you did this. Why did you do this? I see that you've done that. What were you thinking? Just to get you into that process. But you should be doing that while you're reading the play. Imagine this character. How do I imagine this character? I mean, you get hints sometimes. She looks like this. She's tall, she's blonde, she's dark-haired, she's short. I mean, some descriptions are in there. In fact, when we come to this very first play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hermia and Hermione are physically described. One's short and dark, the other's tall and blonde. And that's the subject of comedy itself, the interactions between the two. But I'll get to that when I get to it. But then the assessment is, as usual, the essays in the final exam. The final exam is yet more essays. I like getting you to write essays. I think they're helpful. They get you to pull together your thoughts and present it in a coherent, brief fashion. It requires a lot of difficult decisions on your part to some degree. I'm going to talk about this, I'm not going to talk about that. If I want my essay to be more expansive, though, I want to pull in ideas that go a little bit beyond the breadth of the essay to give it a little bit of a sense of interest. Because if it's really narrowly on one topic, it can be quite tedious for you to write. Anyway, and then the final exam. So that is the course outline there, and there's all this boilerplate stuff. I have some bibliography here, selected works which I think you might find helpful. Ones that I would particularly recommend are this one by E.M.W. Tilliard, The Elizabethan World Picture. I thought I put that as a hyperlink, but maybe I didn't. And the other, have I actually got it here? I'm not sure that I have. No, I think there's another one that I'm missing here. Classical and Christian Ideas in English Renaissance Literature. I'll fix this and I'll stick hyperlinks in for them. Some useful critical works in terms of the Shakespearean worldview. And that is the hardest thing for us to get under our belts, is to think the way Shakespeare thinks and to see the way Shakespeare sees, and not to take him as a quasi-romantic poet, which the Romantics have, unfortunately, or fortunately, but certainly, truthfully, have made us think of them as psychological plays. There's studies in human psychology. And although I think that psychology is there, and Shakespeare is interested in the interior life of the characters, if we reduce it to that, we're missing a great deal that is in the plays. And that's going to be the emphasis of the introductory lecture, is just what is the big picture. Because the Romantics have a very, I think, correct observation that Shakespeare really does explore conscience and the psyche and various states of human distress and so forth. And we can talk about that, and I put even hyperlinks there. Maybe actually that's maybe where I put them. Yes, so that's where the hyperlink is. One of them at any rate. And then in terms of Elizabethan psychology, maybe I'll come to this when I do the introduction. In fact, I will do that. But the web page itself, the class Moodle web page, I will put links up there. That there's so much material on Shakespeare. I'll try and give you the ones that you should maybe focus on at this stage. And if you get those under your belt, then you've done very well. But Tilliard's book, The Elizabethan World Picture, is quite helpful. But there are other books out there. And then the idea of the humors is explaining physiology and also psychology. Note here characteristics. If you are melancholic, then you're thoughtful and sentimental and affected and brooding and a malcontent and contemplative or whatever. If you have the humor of blood, then you're confident and beneficent and joyful and amorous. If you have too much yellow bile, then you're really easily angered and you're impatient and you're obstinate and you're vengeful and you're decisive and you're really intense. We call all these things psychology. We explain all these things through psychology. Shakespeare will connect them through physiology, and when I say physiology, I don't mean the whole of the human being, I mean the small little component parts of human physiology, the elements that the whole universe is made up of. So it's a very interesting connection of what we would call mind-body or brain-body. Like, what's the connection between the way we think or the way we feel and our physical health? A lot of studies on that now. And it's a new thing for modern medicine to be thinking about the way what we consume affects our mood. And now everything's about gut health and stuff like that. And the little micro organisms that are in your gut will affect all sorts of other things. And who knew? Well, the Elizabethans knew, although they had no idea of what a microorganism was. But they did have an idea of what a microcosm was and a macrocosm. And so that fits into it. In some ways, the Elizabethan view of psychology is more persuasive than modern psychology. But we'll get to that when we get to it. To the actual syllabus here, are there any questions? This is just basic stuff, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but any questions about the syllabus per se? For those of you who haven't been with me, and I think pretty much all of you have, I stick the lectures up on YouTube afterwards. So if you miss a class because of sickness or who knows what, and it's probably especially important because it's only once a week now, they'll go up afterwards on YouTube for you to watch. But I encourage you to take notes in the class if you can, handwritten notes. If you want to go back and I missed something, let me go back, and then obviously you can do that. But the best thing you can do when in class is to take good notes, which doesn't mean writing everything down that I say, because it's not worth writing down. If you want the whole thing, go back to the YouTube lecture. But really, you should be processing it. And these notes that I have are from when I studied Shakespeare. Some of them today, right? I've added to them. But good note-taking is a skill that is helpful to your own maturation. Questions? Anyone? I don't know why I have this Monday, Wednesday at 12 to 12:30. It is free then. I'm also available after the class. No? Good.